In the year 1453, Constantinople stood as the crown jewel of Christendom, a city of unparalleled wealth, beauty, and history. Nestled between the shimmering waters of the Golden Horn and the Bosphorus Strait, it had endured for over a millennium as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Its walls had repelled countless invaders, and its streets had witnessed the ebb and flow of empires. But beneath the grandeur of domes, palaces, and bustling markets, a storm was gathering, one that would reshape the course of history forever. To step into Constantinople in the mid-15th century was to enter a city suspended between past and present. The Hagia Sophia, the great basilica constructed under Emperor Justinian, dominated the skyline with its massive dome, a testament to human ingenuity and the empire's spiritual devotion. Inside, gold mosaics glimmered in the light that streamed through stained glass, telling stories of saints, emperors, and miracles. The air was filled with the scent of incense, mingled with the salty breeze of the sea. Life in Constantinople was vibrant. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, and beyond filled the markets with silks, spices, and precious metals. Scholars debated philosophy in shaded courtyards. Monks meticulously copied ancient manuscripts, preserving the knowledge of the ages for future generations. Soldiers drilled in the streets, ever vigilant behind the imposing Theodosian walls, the ultimate symbol of the city's strength. These walls were more than stone, they were a psychological fortress, an emblem of an empire that had withstood the test of time. Yet the city's grandeur concealed its fragility. The Byzantine Empire, once a powerhouse of the eastern Mediterranean, had shrunk to Constantinople and a handful of territories along the Aegean coast. Its population had dwindled to perhaps 50,000 souls, a shadow of the thriving metropolis it had been centuries earlier. Political intrigue simmered within the palace. Nobles plotted, generals debated, and the Emperor, Constantine XI, understood the immense responsibility he bore: to protect a city that represented the last beacon of a fading civilization. Constantinople was more than a city, it was a symbol. Its fall would not just signify the end of an empire, but the collapse of centuries of tradition, faith, and knowledge. Artists, architects, and merchants were the lifeblood of the city, maintaining a fragile balance between survival and decadence. From the cafes along the shoreline to the hidden chapels in the hills, life continued, almost oblivious to the shadow gathering on the horizon. And yet, beyond the walls, history was moving swiftly. A new power had risen in Anatolia, one that would challenge the old order. The Ottoman Turks, led by a young and ambitious Sultan, Mehmed II, were expanding at a terrifying pace. Armies were trained, cannons were forged, and a siege that would shake the very foundations of Europe was being prepared. Constantinople, for all its splendor, would soon face a test unlike any it had ever known. A confrontation between the old world and the new, between stone walls and gunpowder, between centuries of tradition and the unstoppable tide of change. As the sun set over the Bosphorus, painting the domes and towers in gold and crimson, the citizens of Constantinople could not know that their city, their home, and their empire were about to face its final, fateful trial. Beyond the walls of Constantinople, a storm had been gathering for decades. The Ottoman Empire, once a small principality in northwestern Anatolia, had grown into a formidable force under a succession of ambitious sultans. By the mid-15th century, the Ottomans controlled nearly all of Anatolia and had pushed deep into the Balkans. Their influence was no longer regional, it was a rising power that threatened the very heart of Christendom. At the center of this new power stood a young, determined ruler, Mehmed II. At just 19 years old, he had ascended the throne with a vision that extended far beyond the borders of his inherited lands. Unlike his predecessors, Mehmed was not content to be a regional sultan. He dreamed of conquest, of cementing the Ottoman Empire as the dominant force in both East and West. And to achieve this, there was only one prize: Constantinople. Mehmed understood the city's significance. It was the key to controlling trade between Europe and Asia, the gateway to the Mediterranean, and the symbolic jewel of the Byzantine Empire. Capturing it would not only secure wealth and strategic advantage, it would also declare the Ottoman Empire as a power that could rival any kingdom or principality in Europe. To prepare for the siege, Mehmed assembled a force unlike anything the world had seen. Tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, and engineers converged on the hills surrounding Constantinople. Cannons, massive, terrifying engines of destruction, were transported from far-off foundries and positioned to batter the city's fabled walls. These were not ordinary cannons. Some were nearly 27 feet long and weighed more than 15 tons, capable of hurling stone projectiles large enough to crush a man or collapse a tower. Ottoman engineers spent months perfecting their use, creating an arsenal designed specifically to overcome the city's legendary fortifications. Mehmed also understood the importance of psychological warfare. Scouts and spies infiltrated the city, observing patrols, noting weaknesses, and spreading rumors to sow fear among the citizens. The young sultan even constructed a massive floating bridge across the Golden Horn, bypassing the sea chain that protected the city and demonstrating both ingenuity and determination. Inside Constantinople, news of Mehmed's preparations spread like wildfire. Panic mingled with disbelief. For centuries, the Theodosian walls had repelled every invader, from the Persians to the Bulgars, from the Crusaders to the fierce armies of the Seljuks. Could these walls, these centuries-old fortifications, withstand the power of cannons and the cunning of a determined sultan? Emperor Constantine XI, a man of courage and conviction, called upon every able-bodied man and foreign mercenary he could muster. Genoese sailors, Venetian soldiers, and even knights from far-off lands joined the defense. The Byzantine leadership knew that time was not on their side. Supplies were limited, morale was fragile, and the city's population, though accustomed to grandeur, was not prepared for the horrors to come. Every day, more scouts reported Ottoman movements, each detail a reminder of the inevitable clash. From the battlements, sentries watched as the Ottoman army encamped outside the walls, a sea of tents, banners, and war machines stretching for miles. The tension was palpable. Mehmed II, patient and calculating, understood that a hasty assault would be costly. Siege warfare was an art, and he was its master. Towers and trenches were built, siege engines positioned with precision, and supplies stockpiled to outlast the defenders. Yet the young sultan also recognized the value of a bold, decisive strike. A moment when courage and innovation could overwhelm even the most formidable defenses. By spring of 1453, the Ottoman threat was no longer a distant rumor or an abstract fear. It was real. The walls of Constantinople, once symbols of invincibility, were under the shadow of cannons and the gaze of an ambitious conqueror. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the people of the city realized that their home, the city that had withstood every empire and every invasion, might finally fall. The stage was set. The final chapter of the Byzantine Empire was about to unfold, and the world would never forget the siege that followed. On a cold April morning in 1453, the Ottoman army surrounded Constantinople, a sprawling force of over 80,000 soldiers, engineers, and support personnel. The city, with perhaps 50,000 inhabitants and defenders, seemed dwarfed beneath the sheer scale of the Ottoman encampments. Towers of tents, watchfires, and the steady rhythm of military preparation stretched across the hills outside the city. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes history-changing events. For centuries, Constantinople's Theodosian walls had been deemed impenetrable. Constructed over multiple generations and reinforced with towers every few dozen meters, they were the ultimate defensive structure of the medieval world. High and wide, with a secondary wall running parallel and a moat deep enough to deter siege engines, these fortifications had repelled countless attackers. But now, technology was changing the rules of war. Cannons, once little more than curiosities, had evolved into massive engines of destruction capable of breaching stone walls with relentless bombardment. Mehmed II wasted no time. Ottoman engineers positioned the largest cannon ever seen, the legendary Basilica, a monstrous artillery piece capable of hurling stone boulders the size of small carriages. Day after day, the cannon fired with terrifying precision, shaking walls and rattling the nerves of Constantinople's defenders. Each explosion sent clouds of dust and stone fragments flying, creating small craters and weakening even the thickest sections of the fortifications. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI coordinated a desperate defense. Soldiers, mercenaries, and citizens labored together to repair damaged walls, fill gaps with rubble, and keep morale alive. Boiling oil, archers, and fire pots were deployed to repel any Ottoman forces attempting to scale the walls. The defenders had courage in abundance, but the numerical imbalance was staggering. The Ottomans did not rely solely on brute force. Nightly assaults and feints kept the Byzantines constantly vigilant, preventing them from resting. Ships laden with soldiers attempted to breach the chain that blocked access to the Golden Horn, only to be met with fire arrows and grappling hooks. Mehmed, ever the tactician, adapted quickly, moving his fleet and building a makeshift road to transport ships overland into the Horn, a brilliant maneuver that bypassed the city's strongest naval defenses. Life inside Constantinople during the siege was grim. Residents of the city, many of whom had never held a weapon, helped haul supplies, mend walls, and care for the wounded. Markets emptied, fear replaced commerce. Bells rang not in celebration, but to signal alarm, reminding citizens that every day could be their last. The smell of smoke, human sweat, and fear hung in the air, mingling with the scent of the sea. Despite the terror, moments of heroism shone through. Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani led elite troops along the vulnerable section of the walls known as the land walls, personally engaging Ottoman soldiers in brutal combat. Archers rained arrows on attackers with deadly precision, and miners tunneled beneath siege towers, attempting to collapse them. Each day was a brutal dance of life and death, a constant struggle to hold back the inexorable tide. Yet Mehmed's patience and determination never wavered. The bombardment continued without pause. Siege towers, reinforced with timber and leather, crept toward the walls under cover of darkness. Small Ottoman units attempted to scale the walls in night raids, testing defenses and exhausting the defenders. Every day, the city's physical and psychological endurance was tested to the limit. By late May, cracks had begun to appear, both in the walls and in the defenders' resolve. The cannons had done their work. Sections of the great fortifications showed signs of collapse. The once mighty city that had repelled the Persians, the Arabs, and the Crusaders was feeling the relentless pressure of a new era of warfare. And while Constantinople had survived for more than 1,000 years, the siege had revealed a harsh truth. The medieval world and its reliance on stone and steel might not survive the age of gunpowder. The stage was now set for the final, decisive assault, a day that would determine the fate of an empire and leave an indelible mark on history. By early May 1453, Constantinople was holding on by a thread. The relentless Ottoman bombardment had shattered sections of the city's walls, and fatigue gnawed at both soldiers and civilians alike. The city's defenders knew that the end was near, yet there was no surrender. Emperor Constantine XI, a figure of courage and dignity, moved among the walls, rallying troops, inspiring civilians, and embodying the very spirit of Byzantium. His presence was a beacon of hope in a city teetering on the edge of collapse. Mehmed II, watching from the Ottoman camp, knew that timing was everything. A hasty assault could cost thousands of lives and allow the Byzantines a chance to recover. Patience, strategy, and psychological pressure were his greatest allies. Then, on the morning of May 29th, the Sultan launched his final, devastating assault. The Ottoman army, numbering over 80,000, surged forward in waves, battering the weakened walls with cannons and scaling towers. Smoke and dust choked the air, punctuated by the roar of artillery and the clash of steel. Inside the city, chaos reigned. Soldiers fought desperately along the walls, pouring boiling oil and hurling stones at the advancing Ottoman forces. Civilians, including women and children, joined the defense, throwing whatever they could from the ramparts. The cries of battle echoed through the streets, mingling with the terrified wails of the population trapped below. Yet even the most heroic resistance could not stem the tide. By mid-morning, Ottoman forces had breached a section of the walls. The defenders, exhausted and outnumbered, made a last stand. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander who had led elite troops for weeks, was gravely wounded in the defense, and the morale of the defenders faltered. The once unassailable Theodosian walls had finally been broken. Emperor Constantine XI, refusing to abandon his city, donned his armor and rode into battle alongside his troops. Accounts of the moment vary, but it is said that he fought fiercely, sword in hand, until he was overwhelmed and killed, his body never definitively found. With the death of the emperor, the last threads of organized resistance collapsed. The Ottoman forces poured into Constantinople, filling streets that had been vibrant only days before. What followed was a brutal, terrifying sweep of conquest. The city, its walls breached and its defenders scattered, fell into chaos. Looting and destruction accompanied the initial occupation. Palaces, churches, and homes were ransacked. Precious relics, treasures, and manuscripts were seized or destroyed. The Hagia Sophia, symbol of Byzantine faith and artistry, was converted into a mosque, its mosaics whitewashed and Christian icons removed. The centuries of Byzantine culture and learning, accumulated over a millennium, were profoundly altered in a single day. Yet amid the devastation, stories of heroism and humanity endured. Families sheltered each other, merchants hid treasures to protect their communities, and some soldiers risked their lives to save civilians from the worst of the chaos. These acts of courage and compassion are often overshadowed by the enormity of the conquest, but they remind us that even in humanity's darkest hours, resilience can shine. The fall of Constantinople was not merely a local or regional event, it was a seismic shift in world history. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, the last vestige of the Roman Empire, and the beginning of a new era dominated by the Ottomans. Trade routes shifted, European powers searched for alternative paths to Asia, and the Renaissance, already underway in Italy, found new urgency as scholars and artists fled the fallen city, bringing classical knowledge to Western Europe. The psychological impact on Europe was profound. The city that had stood for over 1,000 years, whose walls had seemed invincible, had fallen to a younger, ambitious power armed with new technology and strategy. It was a stark reminder that empires, no matter how ancient or revered, are not eternal. Even today, the memory of Constantinople's last days evokes awe and sorrow. The city, reborn as Istanbul under Ottoman rule, still bears traces of its Byzantine past in its architecture, its streets, and its stories. The fall of Constantinople serves as a timeless testament to the fragility of civilization, the courage of defenders, and the unstoppable march of history. The fall of Constantinople on May 29, 1453, was more than the collapse of a city, it was the end of an era. The Byzantine Empire, which had survived for over 1,000 years as the continuation of Rome, was gone. In its place rose the Ottoman Empire, now poised to dominate the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. The consequences of that single day rippled across Europe, the Middle East, and even Asia, reshaping trade, culture, and the balance of power. For the citizens of Constantinople, life after the conquest was unrecognizable. Survivors were often enslaved, sold to distant lands, or forced to convert to Islam. Palaces that had once housed emperors became administrative centers for the new rulers. Churches, including the magnificent Hagia Sophia, were converted into mosques. Yet despite the loss and destruction, the city endured, reborn under a new identity that would eventually evolve into the modern metropolis of Istanbul. Europe felt the shock acutely. Constantinople had been the bridge between East and West, a hub for trade, knowledge, and diplomacy. Its fall severed familiar routes and forced European powers to seek alternative paths to Asia, inadvertently catalyzing the age of exploration. The voyages of Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan were directly influenced by the Ottoman control of trade routes and the collapse of Byzantine power. A world that had long looked east toward Constantinople now looked to the seas. The migration of scholars from the fallen city also accelerated the Renaissance in Western Europe. Greek philosophers, mathematicians, and theologians fled the Ottoman advance, bringing with them precious manuscripts, classical texts, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. Cities such as Florence, Venice, and Rome suddenly had access to works that had been preserved only in Constantinople. This influx of knowledge sparked intellectual growth, reshaping art, science, and philosophy. In a sense, the fall of Constantinople helped ignite a cultural rebirth that would transform Europe forever. The military innovations seen during the siege, most notably the use of massive cannons and gunpowder artillery, also signaled the dawn of a new age of warfare. Stone walls, once symbols of invincibility, were no longer sufficient to withstand modern siege technology. Fortifications across Europe were redesigned, and military strategy evolved to accommodate the realities of gunpowder warfare. Constantinople's fall was both a warning and a lesson, demonstrating that even the mightiest of cities could fall to innovation, determination, and ambition. Yet the human story remains at the heart of this event. Emperor Constantine XI, the last Roman emperor, became a symbol of courage and sacrifice. Stories of ordinary citizens who fought, hid treasures, or protected their families are still remembered in chronicles and oral traditions. The siege and fall of Constantinople exemplify the extremes of human experience: heroism, terror, tragedy, and resilience. Even today, the legacy of 1453 is evident. Istanbul's skyline, a blend of Byzantine churches and Ottoman mosques, tells the story of centuries of conquest, adaptation, and rebirth. Archaeological remnants of the Theodosian walls still stand, silent witnesses to the ingenuity and determination of the people who built them. Scholars study the siege not only for military insights but also for its cultural and historical significance, understanding that this single event bridged two worlds, the medieval and the modern. The fall of Constantinople reminds us that history is never static. Civilizations rise, flourish, and sometimes fall, leaving behind lessons for those who follow. It teaches us that technological innovation, political ambition, and human courage can alter the fate of empires. It also reminds us of the fragility of civilization and the enduring power of memory. As we walk through the streets of modern Istanbul, we can trace the echoes of the past in the city's architecture, in the call of the muezzin mingling with the stones of Byzantine churches, and in the very layout of the city itself. Constantinople's story is not just a tale of loss, it is a story of rebirth, adaptation, and the relentless march of history. It is a testament to human resilience and a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, life and civilization finds a way to continue. The Byzantine Empire may have fallen, but its legacy endures. Through art, architecture, philosophy, and collective memory, Constantinople continues to live on, reminding us that while empires may fall, the stories they leave behind are eternal. And so, the siege of 1453 is more than a historical event. It is a lesson in courage, strategy, and resilience, a story of a city that faced annihilation and transformed the world forever.